Yesterday I mentioned, as I was reflecting on the Hail Mary, that I could remember and name every sister that I had in grade school, and that I could remember every quirk, I think, of every nun I had in grade school. I remembered that the third grade sister, she always she wore her cord, her rope cord, a little bit differently than all of the other nuns at school. I think, to be honest with you, the poor soul was just too old, and the habit was just too complex that she finally just gave up one day and decided to tie it as simply as possible. Another one of the sisters, she always hung her shawl up differently than all of the other nuns. It's just amazing what, as a little kid, you pick up as you watch people. And as I said, I'm sure as a teacher, I know as a teacher, I have my own quirks. And if the students that I teach were here, they could list them pretty much all for you. They would tell you, for example, that whenever I'm in class lecturing, I almost inevitably, during the course of a class, use the word footnote. And what that means is something has come into my head that originally wasn't there. And I want to sort of footnote what I'm going to say. They would tell you that whenever one of them asks a question, I will almost always answer it by beginning with the phrase, well, to be perfectly blunt with you. But one of the things they would inevitably tell you is that I almost always refer in some way, shape, or form to my age. As a matter of fact, whenever I give an examination, there's always sort of a 1 point extra credit question in which they have to either name the year I was born or name my age. Every once in a while, I'll go to the class website and I'll cut and paste 4 of their pictures and put my picture among them. And it'll be a question like, which one of the following 5 is the youngest looking? And they know that they have to put my name down, Or in the age thing, they'll list, 29 or 30, something like that. The more politically astute ones will always answer that way. And the higher a grade they want, of course, the lower my age gets. I have these quirks, but the age thing is one of them. A couple years ago, when I was still the chair of the department, I was in my office one day, and one of my students came in. I was sitting at my desk working at the computer, and he sat at the table for a little while, and I knew that he was there to do more than simply pass time. After you teach for a while, you can detect when the student just wants to come in and sit, and when somebody is a person with a mission. And so I looked up from my computer, and then I finally got up, and I went over and I sat at the table. And I won't say his name, we'll just call him Carl, since Father Peeber's first name is Carl. I'll say, Carl, what is it that you want? And he looked at me and he said, well, Father, you're always saying how old you are. And of course, then with a rather cynical smile on his face, he said, of course you don't look that old. But then he said, I have a question. After all of those years, what is the most important thing that you've learned in life? And I looked at the student and I said to him, well, geez, Carl, that's a big question, and I'm not sure that I know the answer. I might need time to think about it, but actually, within a few seconds, I looked at him and I said, I think I do know the answer. I think that the most important thing that I've learned in all of these years is that God loves us, and that without some knowledge and some experience of God's love and just love in general in our lives, that many people die before their hearts stop beating. It does seem to me that as life goes on, things become simpler. I realize that we're living in a very complex world, but I tend to think that it's a complexity at times of our own making. And I'm not sure whether I'm getting wiser and smarter or just sillier and dumber. But it does seem to me that there are a few important things in life, and one of them is to love and to know that we are loved. The phrase that we're meditating on today is this simple phrase, full of grace. The Greek word in the translation is kakaritomene. It's a phrase that is very difficult to translate, but sometimes translators use the following kinds of phrases: "Oh, highly favored one." St. Jerome used a Latin phrase, gratia plena, which we've translated as full of grace. Another way of expressing it might be as the one most deeply loved by God. You know, I mentioned that yesterday, the first two words, of course, as we all know of the Hail Mary, are Hail Mary. But if you look at the text, that's not what St. Gabriel says. Gabriel, in fact, doesn't name Mary as Mary at that point. We learn of Mary's name in a previous point in the text where it says that the angel Gabriel was sent to a virgin betrothed to a man named Joseph, and the virgin's name was Mary. It's only later on in that visitation between Gabriel and Mary that Gabriel pronounces Mary's name. He looks at Mary and he sees that there is some perplexity, some fear possibly on her face, and he says to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary." But at this point, after he says greetings or hello or hail, he immediately uses this phrase, "O most highly favored one," full of grace. Or another way of expressing it is the one deeply loved by God. In all humility, at this point in my theological career, I've read lots of books on grace. And as a little kid, to be quite blunt with you, I used to think that it was kind of a liquid that was poured into your soul. And, you know, you could gain it or you could lose it, and it came in different shapes and sizes: sanctifying grace and actual grace and sacramental grace. And I don't dispute the usefulness of all of those categories. But in the final analysis, to be rather blunt with you, it seems to me that grace is just one more fancy theological term for God's love for us and for how deeply we are loved by God. And that in part, to say that Mary is full of grace is to say that Mary is one who is so very deeply loved by God. And that what she does is she reflects for us what it is that we are also. She reminds us in her Immaculate Conception that before there was original sin, there was original innocence. And before we fell, we walked with God in the garden. And that despite that fall, and that despite that sin, God still loves us. I don't have a really high doctrine of grace in my head or frankly, in my heart. I believe in the Immaculate Conception because the Church teaches it, and because I believe Mary reflects it. I believe that grace is available within these four walls through what we call sacraments. But if we're honest with ourselves, most of our lives are conducted outside of these four walls. And so, to be quite honest with you, when I see glimpses of grace, I see them outside of these four walls. I see a glimpse of that grace when a young woman gets up in a bus and gives her seat to someone who's either elderly or crippled. I see it when a bus driver sees someone running towards the bus and slows down so that that person can catch the bus. I see it when one person holds a door for another. I see it when one person takes the energy and the time and the effort to look another person in the eyes and to learn that person's name. You might say that grace plays at the edges of the ordinary events of life. So it was with Mary, and so it is with us. There is a rather interesting little British poet by the name of Sheena Pugh. She wrote a lovely little poem some years ago. She was born in 1960, but she captures this. The name of the poem is Sometimes, and she says this: sometimes things don't go, after all, from bad to worse. Some years, muscadel faces down frost, green thrives, the crops don't fail. Sometimes a man aims high and all goes well. A people sometimes will step back from war, elect an honest man, decide that they care enough that they can't leave some stranger poor. Some men become what they were born for. Sometimes our best efforts do not go amiss. Sometimes we do as we meant to. The sun will sometimes melt a field of sorrow that seems hard frozen. May it happen for you. Kakare Tomine, hail, O most highly favored one, O most deeply loved one, full of grace. It happened for Mary. And if we stop and simply look into the mirror of God's grace shining out from Mary, we will see a glimmer of the deep love that God has for each one of us, just as he has for Mary.